After food has been digested and nutrients absorbed in the small intestine, it is time to move on to the large intestine. This transfer takes place at the ileocecal valve, right here. So the ileum is the last part of the small intestine. Anything that wasn't digested and absorbed makes it to here. It passes through this valve into the large intestine. The material is then going to go up, across, and down through the colons. As it moves through the colon absorbs water and electrolytes. So when it enters, it is a liquid. And by the time it gets to the end, it is a solid feces because you're absorbing so much of the water out of it. The parts of the colon, the part where it goes up here on the right is the ascending colon because you're moving up. Then it goes across. This is the transverse colon because transverse means across. Then when the material is moving down on the left, that is the descending colon, descending for down. Then this curve here is the sigmoid colon. So those are the various parts of the colon where you absorb water and electrolytes and you turn that liquid material into a solid feces. An important substance to have here is fiber. This is why you need fiber in your diet. Fiber gives something solid for the colon to push against. If you don't have fiber, the material tends to get stuck. There's nothing for the colon to push, and it tends to just sit there. A movement through the colon tends to occur in what's called mass movements. So it's not a slow, steady movement like through the small intestine. It's rather a few times a day it moves a long distance. And these tend to be triggered by the filling of the stomach. So a lot of times emptying the bowels will occur right after eating. That's because when you fill your stomach, that triggers the large intestine to have a mass movement. It pushes everything along and then you get stuff to the end ready to come out. Another important feature here is bacteria. So remember we talked about this in chapter 22. You have all those healthy bacteria. You have about 5 pounds of bacteria that live in your colon. And they're very important. they protect you. Remember the whole C. diff thing and the fecal transplant? So they protect you from pathogens. They help digest some food here. So there's a little bit of digestion still occurring here. And they make vitamins for you. There's even more recent research showing that they even help control your genes. They turn genes off and on. There's a link between the bacteria that live in your intestine and how you express your genes. In addition to the colon, there's some other parts of the large intestine. This area that hangs down below the ileocecal valve is called the cecum. And it's nicknamed the blind pouch because it's a dead end. Material comes in through the ileocecal valve and it moves up the ascending colon. This is just a little dead end hanging out down below there. And then this little thing hanging off of the cecum is the appendix. And it looks kind of like a worm, so it is also called the vermiform organ, because vermi means worm. So in humans, the cecum and the appendix don't really have much of a function. The appendix especially is just full of bacteria. And as long as these bacteria stay in there and behave, you're fine. But sometimes they can get overgrown, and if they escape from your intestine and get into your bloodstream, that's very dangerous. You definitely don't want any of these bacteria from the large intestine escaping from the large intestine. In other animals, like horses and rabbits that eat a lot of grass and hay and clover and such, they do use the cecum and the appendix. So like a horse, for example, has very large cecum, and there's several of them because they need it to digest all that hay. But in humans, since we don't eat grass and hay and clover, we don't really use it. Then the other parts, when you get here after the sigmoid colon, this is the rectum, and this is what stores feces. And then the anus is what expels feces. And if things go wrong in the colon, you can end up with either diarrhea or constipation. Diarrhea is when you don't absorb enough water. So this is where your colon failed to absorb enough water. And there's a couple of things that can cause it to fail to absorb enough water. One is if the material moves too fast. This tends to happen in response to an irritant. So if you eat something your body doesn't like, or if you have a pathogen that's irritating your intestine, you just try to hurry up and get it out. So that's why like certain people have certain foods that trigger them to have diarrhea, and they know they have to avoid those foods because that's an irritant to their body. And if they eat it, their body just wants to hurry up and get it out, so it makes everything move really fast to get that out. And in the case of a pathogen, that's protecting you from infection. If your body detects that there's a pathogen in your intestine and it can hurry up and get it out of there, then that can protect you from getting sick. So a healthy adult who has a mild case of diarrhea, you're better off to just let it go, not take medicine to try to stop the diarrhea, because you're getting the irritant out of your body. Once it's out, you can recover and go back to normal. If you take like the Imodium or something to try and stop the diarrhea, you're just keeping that irritant inside you where it's going to keep irritating your body. The other factor is an osmotic. So think about osmosis. It's when water is attracted to something. So an osmotic attracts water. So if you eat an osmotic, then it will attract the water and keep it in your large intestine. An example of this, there is an artificial sweetener that for a while was used in gummy bears. They've taken these off the market now. Notice it says currently unavailable. But there for a while, people would buy these sugar-free gummy bears and then they would get terrible diarrhea. And people on Amazon, I think they got a little creative with this. So I think it started out as legitimate and then people kind of started embellishing their stories. But if you go on Amazon and look up these Haribo sugar-free gummy bears, there's some pretty funny stories here in the customer reviews about how these gummy bears give people diarrhea. And the reason for it is the artificial sweetener that's in these gummy bears is an osmotic. So you can have this like from artificial sweeteners. It can also happen like with sugar-free gum. If you chew too much, so a normal amount's fine, but if you just go overboard and you're like, I'm going to go through 5 packs of sugar-free gum a day, you could end up giving yourself diarrhea from the artificial sweetener in there. This is also why you can't let little kids have straight up apple juice. Those of you who have ever dealt with toddlers, if you give a 2-year-old a glass of apple juice, they will have diarrhea. This is why parents always dilute the juice with water, because the apple juice, a lot of fruit juices are osmotics. And little kids, their intestines just can't handle that much osmotic. And if they drink juice, they get diarrhea. This is also the idea behind Miralax. So Miralax is a laxative. It's used to treat constipation. So diarrhea is the opposite of constipation. If you're having trouble with constipation, you can take Miralax, and it's an osmotic. It'll pull water into the large intestine, and then that will help relieve the constipation. So then constipation is the other side of the spectrum. It is the opposite of diarrhea. So this is where the colon absorbs too much water. And this tends to be because the material moves too slowly. So since the material is moving slow, it's staying in the colon longer and you're absorbing more water from it. This is typically due to a lack of fiber. So if you don't have fiber, there's nothing for the colon to push against to make the material move. So it tends to just sit there, and as it sits, you keep absorbing more water. This produces a stool that is dry and hard. And then you kind of get into this downward spiral, this positive feedback effect. Because the stool is dry and hard, it is painful to pass. So people, especially children who don't quite understand the implications, when they get constipation, then they know it hurts to poop, so they try not to poop. They hold it in. Well, then holding it in only makes the problem worse. Now you create a blockage. Now you get more stool stuck behind this stool you're holding in, and then that stool gets dry and hard, and you can get all impacted with all this dry, hard stool building up in the rectum. So the best thing to do here is to just avoid the problem in the first place. Drink lots of water, eat lots of fiber. If you do get a dry, hard stool, even though it hurts to pass it, get it out of there, because if you hold it in, you're just going to make things worse. Another problem, and unfortunately it tends to go along with constipation, is hemorrhoids. There are veins in the rectum. So this is the rectum, and here are veins in the rectum. In chapter 20, we learned about varicose veins. Hemorrhoids are when these veins become varicose. So a varicose vein, remember, is swollen. So you get these swollen veins in the rectum. And then that makes going to the bathroom painful because the feces has to pass over those varicose veins and it hurts them. So if you get constipation and hemorrhoids together, it's kind of a double whammy. It hurts even more. You've got two different things causing pain. And sometimes also these veins can get so swollen that they actually hang out through the rectum. So best thing there, fiber, water, exercise, avoid getting this problem to begin with.